The Frierdiker Rebbe spoke out against smoking. Why didn't the Rebbe do the same?
I take issue with that statement. The statement is that the Rebbe did not emphasize the idea of not smoking. You know, there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. The Rebbe didn't talk about all of them. The Rebbe talked about the ones he thought he needed to talk about. Right? For example, the Rebbe didn't talk about shatnez. Are you going to say the Rebbe didn't care about shatnez? And the proof is he didn't talk about it every day? The Rebbe didn't talk about many things. The Rebbe talked about the things he needed to talk about because he felt that they needed to be strengthened, and he felt that they were the keys, they were the tools by which you could bring a yid closer, not just to these mitzvahs, but to all mitzvahs. But the fact that the Rebbe didn't talk about something, certainly the fact that the Rebbe did not talk about something repeatedly, in no way underscores that he didn't enforce it or believe in it. For example, I'll give you a great example. There's so many people who say that the Rebbe didn't emphasize tefillah b'arichas, davening long, arichas tefillah. It's not true. The Rebbe would on occasion talk about it and say, if I don't talk about it every day, doesn't believe, I don't approve of it, I don't hold of it. The Rebbe talked about the things he needed to talk about, but the things he didn't talk about that the previous Rebbeim talked about were as much his issue as anything else. In other words, to the Rebbe, if the previous Rebbe said it, it doesn't need to his strengthening. The previous Rebbe said it. There's nothing more powerful in the mind of the Rebbe than something which was said by his Rebbe. And the idea that if his Rebbe said something and he doesn't repeat it, that's proof that he doesn't hold of it, reveals a complete lack of understanding of the nature of the relation between the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't need to enforce the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe because Einam Sichem Chizik. The Rebbe says, in other words, the Rebbe's own words needed to be strengthened in the Rebbe's mind. But something which his Rebbe said is self-strengthened. So I disagree with the premise. I believe that the previous Rebbe's ban on smoking until 20, that's exactly what it is, it's a ban. And a request that past 20 people shouldn't smoke, the Rebbe didn't emphasize it because it stood on the strength of the previous Rebbe's own words, and the Rebbe didn't need to strengthen something which in the Rebbe's mind was self-strengthened. But while on the subject, I just want to share a little detail. The Rabbeim smoked. All the Rabbeim smoked. And there's a rumor that when the Rebbe had his stroke, Lo Yaleinu, they found cigarettes in the Rebbe's room. Parliament, cigarettes found in the Rebbe's room. It is said, and of course I don't remember this, but it's said that the Rebbe's office, our Rebbe's office, was a cloud of smoke. The Rebbeim smoked incessantly. If you would walk into the Rebbe's room, the room was a heavy, thick cloud of smoke. He smoked constantly. If not a chain smoker, close to a chain smoker. The previous Rebbe was literally a chain smoker. He would literally light a cigarette from a cigarette. There's actually photographs where you could see that the Rebbe had a dish, a plate, on his desk, and the cigarettes were laid out in rows, one on top of the next. The Rebbe could smoke 50, 60, 100 cigarettes a day. The Rebbe smoked an enormous amount. All the Rabbeim smoked. And maybe there's all kinds of practical bases for their smoking. It helped their concentration and so on. But there's also spiritual ideas in the smoking of the Rabbeim. It's brought down in Svarim that the Alter Rebbe said about the Mittel Rebbe. As mein Berel Farechet, if das kein Godel is Makif, Ktedes Nekedesh HaKadosh B'Yom Kippurim. Strong words that the Alter Rebbe said that when my son, the Mittel Rebbe, and he called him my Berel, lights a cigarette, it's like the Kein Godel is lighting Ktedes in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And all the Rabbeim smoked. I mean, the previous Rebbe writes how his father would call him to the intercom and invite him into his room, and he would say, Lomir Farechen, let's light up a cigarette. The Rebbe Rashab would call the previous Rebbe Lomir Farechen, and two would smoke together. The previous Rebbe also smoked. There's many photographs of the previous Rebbe smoking. And again, the Rebbe also smoked. And of course, the end of the story was that the previous Rebbe had all kinds of illnesses, including heart disease. And a doctor who visited him in the late 40s told the previous Rebbe that it had just been discovered by the Surgeon General that cigarette smoke is dangerous. You know, you and I sit here today and can't imagine that anybody would ever think that cigarette smoke isn't dangerous. Let me give you an idea. They used to believe that the solution to asthma, the solution to respiratory trouble, is to smoke cigars. In other words, the solution to having bad lungs is to poison your lungs. Now you understand how that's possible, but that's the fact. That's what medical doctors would prescribe. Children who had respiratory trouble would smoke cigars, which is tobacco mamish. And of course, eventually they understood that cigarette smoke is dangerous for one's health. And of course, the way the story is told is that this doctor was sitting in the previous Rebbe's room, and the previous Rebbe was lighting up a cigarette, and the doctor said to the previous Rebbe, in your medical condition, you really should not smoke because you're ill. So the Rebbe didn't light up a cigarette. And then before the doctor left, he took out a cigarette. In those days, there were no restrictions about smoking in private places, and there were not all the stigma attached to cigarette smoke. And he offered the previous Rebbe a cigarette. And the previous Rebbe said, I don't smoke. So the doctor said to the previous Rebbe, you just told me that you smoke. He says, well, you just told me that cigarette is dangerous to my health, so I don't smoke. And he was literally a chain smoker until that point, stopped cold turkey, never smoked again. And he wrote a letter, which is published in his letters, saying that boys until 20 he outlaws to smoke, and after 20 he requests that they should stop smoking. And the story, again, these are all the stories that Hasidim say, that the Rebbe and Rabbi Mentlik, Olav Shalom, stopped cold turkey. They were chain smokers or very heavy smokers that stopped completely. But again, the people suggest that perhaps the Rebbe smoked cigarettes after that as well, at least on occasion. But it's clear that the smoking by the Rebbeim was a davar ruchni. And the Rebbe also, by the way, there's a book that's called Mind Over Matter, which is an English book, which, as rich as it is probably only a small percentage of what the Rebbe had to say on the subject of science. But they have a section in this book, Mind Over Matter, where you have short blurbs, the Rebbe's opinion on many different things. And one of the things in that book is cigarette smoking. And the Rebbe would sometimes say that people who are heavy smokers will suffer worse medically by stopping to smoke than by continuing to smoke. The Rebbe had a very, very centric view. He had a moderate view. The Rebbe didn't have this, cigarette smoke is dangerous and it kills and it's evil. The Rebbe did not take that approach. A cigarette smoke, he had a very balanced view. It's not healthy, but sometimes a person who's already a smoker, it's preferred for his health that he should continue smoking. Having said that, the idea that the Rebbe somehow was soft on the takana of the Frierdiker Rebbe is a complete misunderstanding of the relationship that existed between the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe.